They changed the classification 6 weeks after she disappeared. Not a missing person case, not an accident investigation, not search and rescue. It's a possible murder investigation of a United States national now. That's the official designation. Possible foreign murder. And here's the thing about that change. It didn't happen because they found her body. It didn't happen because some witness walked in with a video. It happened because when you take Brian Hooker's story and you hold it up against his own GPS data, against his own devices, against what multiple witnesses saw that night, the story doesn't just have holes in it. The story doesn't exist. Today I'm walking you through 5 specific reasons why federal investigators believe this is murder. But I'm also going to do 2 things I haven't seen anyone else really dig into. I'm going to talk about who Brian Hooker is, not just as a husband, but as a person whose behavior has a very recognizable shape to investigators. And then I'm going to get into the legal mechanics of what happens when you're building a murder case and the body is still on the ocean floor. Because this is not a case that's going away. This is a case that's getting louder. My name is Crimetedge. This is what the evidence actually shows. Lynette Hooker was 55 years old and had been living on sailboats for over a decade. That matters. She wasn't a tourist. She wasn't somebody who got on a boat for the first time and got scared in choppy water. She knew currents. She knew tides. She'd been doing this long enough that the water was just where she lived. She and Brian had been in the Bahamas for about 4 weeks leading up to April 4th. They had an Instagram account documenting the whole thing. 2 people sailing around in their boat called the Soulmate, living the life people fantasize about. That evening they went to dinner at the Abaco Inn. Nice spot. They ate, they walked down to the dock, they got into their 8-foot inflatable dinghy with an electric motor. The Soulmate was anchored out in the Sea of Abaco, a trip they'd made before. That's when Brian says everything fell apart. The motor died. Engine stopped cold. He tried to restart it, couldn't. No propulsion. He tried to paddle with 1 oar, useless. He was just out there. 7 to 9 hours, the number shifts depending on which version you're reading. Helpless, drifting, the ocean doing whatever it wanted with him. And at some point in that drift, Lynette went overboard. Brian says she bounced off the back of the dinghy. He threw something, a green floaty device, in her direction. He couldn't get to her. Too rough. He eventually washed up near a boatyard in Marsh Harbor early Easter Sunday morning and called for help. That's the story. Hold it. We're going to go back to it again and again because it doesn't survive contact with any of the evidence. Most channels skip straight to the evidence. I get why. The evidence is dramatic, the evidence is clean, the evidence is easy to present. But I've learned from watching a lot of these cases that the evidence means more when you understand the person it's pointing at. So let's talk about Brian Hooker. The marriage was in trouble. Not new trouble, long-standing trouble. Lynette's mother had been confiding in people close to the family. Details about verbal abuse, details about physical violence. A neighbor named Jordan Plentz went on record publicly and said Lynette had been trying to leave a domestic violence situation for a long time. She'd get out, stay out for a stretch, and then go back. That cycle, Plentz said, had been going on for somewhere around 25 years. 25 years. I want to sit on that number for a second, because it's easy to breeze past it. 25 years of someone leaving and returning, and the research on domestic violence situations is pretty clear on one thing. The most dangerous point in that cycle isn't during it. It's when someone finally decides to end it for real. That's when the risk spikes. That's when things escalate. I'm not saying Lynette had gotten there. There's no confirmed reporting on what she was planning or what conversations happened in the weeks before April 4th. But I am saying that two people with that history, alone on a boat in international waters, weeks from any family or support system, that's a volatile environment. Whatever was happening in that marriage was happening with no witnesses, no neighbors, no one a phone call away. They named the boat the Soulmate. I keep coming back to that. I don't know why exactly. It's probably nothing. But I keep coming back to it. Now, the behavioral picture. Lynette disappears on April 4th. Brian is arrested April 8th. Released without charges April 13th. The very next day, April 14th, he sits down with ABC News and says he has one sole focus, and that focus is finding his wife. One sole focus. Hours after that interview, he flew home. His attorney said he needed to be with his terminally ill mother. That's real. That's a legitimate thing. I'm not dismissing it. But here's what you can't dismiss either. The search was still running. The Coast Guard was still in the water. Lynette had been missing for 10 days, and the husband who said she was his only focus got on a plane and left the Bahamas. People online defend this. They say he'd already cooperated. He'd already answered questions. There was nothing concrete he could do by staying. Maybe that's right. Maybe staying would have accomplished nothing. But I've watched enough of these cases to know that genuine grief doesn't make that calculation. Genuine grief doesn't land on, there's nothing I can do here when the search is still active. Genuine grief stays. It makes calls. It talks to divers. It stands on the dock at 6 a.m. watching the boats go out. Brian Hooker did not do those things. What he also didn't do was anything publicly. No appeals on social media for information. No press conferences begging for tips. No organized search efforts. No reward offers. Nothing. The people doing all of that were Lynette's own family. Her daughter Carly, her mother Darlene. Carly was 28 years old, and she's the one who went on television talking about her mom. Carly is also the one who described what Brian sounded like when he called to tell her what happened. Monotone, she said. Relaxed. Like he was reading from a list. That word keeps coming up across cases like this, and I want to be clear. Grief is not one thing. Shock does strange things to people. Some people go numb. Some people dissociate. There is no single correct way to sound when your wife falls off a boat in the Bahamas. But the absence of urgency, in the first phone call to the stepdaughter of a woman who's missing, that's something people register. It lands wrong. It sticks. It stuck with Carly. Now the 5 reasons. I'm going to go through them one at a time, and I'm going to be specific because the details are where this story lives. Reason 1. The GPS data shows Brian was navigating, not drifting. He was wearing a green smartwatch that night. The kind that logs your location continuously, maps your movement, keeps a record of exactly where you went and how. When investigators pulled the data, they weren't looking at a vessel being pushed around by wind and current in random directions. They weren't looking at the erratic, unpredictable signature of something with no engine at the mercy of the ocean. They were looking at circles, 2 of them, in 2 different locations, deliberate circular patterns. I want to explain what that means physically because it's important. A boat with no engine doesn't circle. A boat being carried by current doesn't circle. Wind doesn't organize itself into perfect loops around a fixed point. To produce a circular pattern on a GPS track, someone has to be steering. Someone has to be making active corrections to maintain a course that curves back on itself. It is a signature of control, not helplessness. 2 circles, 2 locations. And here's what investigators think they're looking at. A search pattern. If you've ever seen footage of boats searching for someone in the water, they don't move in straight lines. They cover an area. They go around it, check it, move to the next zone, go around that. The GPS track from Brian's watch looks less like a man drifting and more like a man who was looking for something, and then, when he didn't find it at the first location, went to look somewhere else. His story requires a dead engine and 7 hours of helplessness. The GPS requires someone at the controls. Those two things cannot both be true. Reason 2. The cadaver dog found nothing. The dinghy sat for 7.5 weeks before investigators brought in the dog. 7.5 weeks in Bahamian heat, but not outside, not exposed. It was stored in a warehouse out of rain and salt air, the environment inside it preserved. Cadaver dogs are trained to detect human decomposition scent. They can pick it up within 3 hours of death on a surface. The longer a body was present in a space, the more saturated that space becomes with detectable biological markers. 7.5 weeks is a long time, but a controlled storage environment keeps those markers intact. The dog went through the dinghy. Nothing. Brian's entire account requires Lynette to have been in that dinghy. She got in at the Abaco Inn dock. She was in it for the entire trip across the water. She fell overboard from it. He was in it trying to get back to her for hours. That dinghy is the scene of every key moment in his version of events. If any of that happened, the dog alerts. The silence of a trained animal is evidence. What's not there is a finding. And what's not there is any trace that Lynette was ever in that dinghy at all. So if she wasn't in the dinghy, where was she? Reason 3. A witness heard a splash from the wrong place at the wrong time. This is the detail I think is going to matter most when this case eventually goes to court and almost nobody is giving it the attention it deserves. On the night of April 4th, there were people near the Soulmate. A woman heard a splash around 9:30 in the evening. Not a small splash, the kind you ignore, but a significant one, the kind that makes you stop and look. And that woman wasn't alone. Multiple people were there, and what they also reported were flares, going off from the Soulmate, not from somewhere out on the water, from the boat. Brian says he left the Abaco Inn dock somewhere around 6:30 that evening. His story happens entirely out on the water, away from the Soulmate, far from the dock, far from any witnesses. He's drifting, the engine is dead. Lynette falls from the dinghy, but at 9:30, witnesses are near the Soulmate hearing a significant splash and seeing flares launch from it. Almost 3 hours after Brian says they left. If Brian's story is true, no one should be at the Soulmate at 9:30 doing anything. It should be sitting empty at anchor, rocking gently in the water, waiting for them to come back. Instead, something goes into the water, something big enough to be heard, and someone on or near that boat fires flares. Investigators took those statements and they mapped the coordinates. When the Coast Guard came back in early June, their divers weren't searching where Brian told police the incident happened. They were searching near the Soulmate, in the water around the coordinates that match what the witnesses described. Because if someone went into the water from the Soulmate at 9:30 that night, then the timeline is completely different from what Brian described. It means something happened at the boat. It means Brian's story of helpless drift and accidental fall isn't just contradicted. It's describing a completely different night than the one that actually occurred. Reason 4. The equipment is missing. 3 things are gone from the Soulmate and the dinghy that should not be gone. The spare torpedo engine. A backup motor for the dinghy. Not on the dinghy, not on the Soulmate. Investigators don't have it. Lynette's pink weight belt, her scuba diving weight belt, gone. Her BCD, buoyancy compensation device, the vest divers wear that holds weights and controls how deep you sink. Little pink accents on it. Gone. These are not things that fall overboard. These are equipment items. You store them. You maintain them. You know where they are. Carly said something in an interview that I genuinely have not been able to stop thinking about. She said, "I have a feeling she might be in the water somewhere with those scuba weights that are missing." A 28-year-old woman, looking at what's absent, saying out loud what the absence implies. Weight belts are designed to do one thing: counteract the natural buoyancy of a human body in water. They keep you down. A BCD loaded with weights does the same thing. A torpedo motor is heavy, metal, substantial. If you needed a body to stay on the bottom of the ocean, not float to the surface, not wash to shore, not be found for weeks or months or ever, those are the items you would reach for. They're on the boat. They're purpose-built for exactly that function. They are all missing. The Soulmate is in Fort Lauderdale right now. Investigators are going through every surface, every system, every piece of electronics. Part of what they're documenting is what should be there and isn't. The absence of those 3 items is not a footnote. It's one of the most important parts of the physical record. Reason 5. He left. On April 14th, Brian Hooker told ABC News he had one sole focus: finding his wife. That same day, he flew home. His attorney said it was his terminally ill mother. I've said already, that's real, that's legitimate. I'm not treating it as sinister on its own. But take that one fact and put it next to everything else. The GPS that shows circles in 2 locations while he claimed to be helplessly drifting. The dinghy that a cadaver dog walked through and found nothing. The witnesses near the Soulmate at 9:30. The missing weights. The missing BCD. The missing engine. Put all of that next to a man who says his only focus is finding his wife, and then boards a plane while the search is still running. Investigators look at behavior, not to convict, but to understand. There's a concept called consciousness of guilt. The idea that what someone does after a crime reflects their assess of what they did, leaving an active search, going silent publicly while Lynette's own family drives the conversation, not organizing, not appealing, not doing any of the things that spouses of genuinely missing people do because they actually believe their person might still be out there. The behavior has a shape, and the shape of it fits everything else in this case. Now, I want to zoom out from the specific evidence for a minute and talk about the broader pattern here, because understanding it explains why investigators move the way they do in cases like this. When a spouse disappears under suspicious circumstances on water, there is a recognizable behavioral signature that shows up again and again. I'm not saying this is a guarantee or a checklist that proves anything, but it's a pattern, and this case matches it closely enough to pay attention. The person tends to sound wrong in initial communications, not grieving wrong, calm wrong, matter-of-fact wrong. The kind of calm that the people on the other end of the phone call register immediately and can't quite explain. Carly used the word monotone. That same word, or something close to it, comes up in case after case. The Scott Peterson case, the Chris Watts case, the Barry Morphew case. The person describing a catastrophe in a tone that doesn't match catastrophe. The story tends to be over-explained in some places and weirdly thin in others. Brian's version covers his helplessness in great detail. Dead engine, one oar, couldn't paddle effectively, couldn't reach her, conditions too rough. But it doesn't explain the GPS. It doesn't explain the dinghy. It doesn't explain 9:30 at the Soulmate. The story was built to answer certain questions, and it answers them fluently. The questions it wasn't built to answer it can't touch. The person tends not to search in the way people who actually expect to find someone alive would search. They cooperate, they answer questions, they make the right statements in the right interviews. But they're not driving the search. They're not the ones who can't sleep. They're not the ones organizing, funding, pushing, demanding. That role in this case belongs to Carly and Darlene, not Brian. And the public presentation of the relationship tends to be cleaned up. When Brian spoke publicly, he spoke like a grieving husband who lost his wife to a terrible accident, not a husband with 2.5 decades of documented volatility, not a husband whose wife's neighbors knew enough about what was happening inside that marriage to use the phrase domestic violence situation. None of this is conviction. None of this is even close to proof. But behavioral science uses these patterns as a direction finder. They help investigators know where to focus. And in this case, everything the behavioral picture suggests is being confirmed by the physical evidence. That's the part that matters, when the behavior and the evidence point in exactly the same direction. Now here is the question almost nobody is asking, even though it's probably the most important question in this entire case. Can you charge someone with murder when there is no body? Yes, you can. It's difficult, it's uncommon, but it happens. And there are prosecutors who specialize in exactly this. Former federal prosecutor Ted DiBiase literally wrote the book on no-body homicide cases, and he's been publicly commenting on this one. What he says is worth understanding in detail. First, jurisdiction. This isn't a state case. The disappearance happened in Bahamian waters, so it doesn't belong to Michigan. It doesn't belong to Florida. It goes federal. The specific statute investigators are working under is called the Foreign Murder of United States Nationals. That's the official designation. Federal law authorizes prosecution of a murder that happened outside American borders when the victim was an American citizen. The case has been categorized under that statute. That's not speculative. That's what officials confirmed to CBS News in early June. Now the no-body piece. DiBiase said something specific about this case that I think is the sharpest legal observation anyone has made publicly. He said that what makes a no-body prosecution viable is when the suspect has told an inconsistent story, because the inconsistency is itself a form of evidence. It points toward consciousness of guilt. It suggests that the person knows the real story and is actively avoiding telling it. Brian Hooker told a story that his own GPS contradicts. That is a provable, demonstrable inconsistency. Not an interpretation, not a theory. A measurable lie you can put in front of a jury on a screen with coordinates. What prosecutors build in a no-body case is a stack. The GPS is physical evidence that he lied about the engine and the drift. The cadaver dog is forensic evidence that undermines his account of Lynette being in the dinghy. The witnesses at the Soulmate are testimonial evidence that contradicts his timeline entirely. The missing equipment is circumstantial evidence of means and concealment. The behavioral pattern across the 10 days after the disappearance is evidence of consciousness of guilt. No single piece of that is a conviction. All of it together, presented to a jury, is a very different thing. The Soulmate is in Fort Lauderdale. That means American labs, American jurisdiction, American chain of custody. Whatever forensic evidence is on that vessel is going to come back, processed by a federal system under federal standards. The dinghy has been in federal custody since June 4th. Every piece of electronics, every navigation log, every surface swab, that's all evidence. The Coast Guard divers are searching specific coordinates right now. Those coordinates come from the GPS circles on Brian's watch And from the witness statements about the splash at 9:30, they know roughly where those two circles were. They know what the witnesses described. They are in the water at those exact locations. If they find Lynette, and especially if they find her with any of the missing equipment attached to her, that changes everything. That's a crime scene. That's cause of death. That potentially confirms the method. At that point, no body prosecution becomes something more straightforward. If they don't find her, the case doesn't collapse. It moves slower, it becomes harder, but no body cases have been prosecuted and won on weaker evidence stacks than what's been assembled here. Brian Hooker has not been charged. He has denied all of this categorically. His attorneys say he did not harm his wife. All of that is true, and it all stands until a charge is filed. But the investigation is not quiet. The divers are in the water. The lab is working. The GPS data is in federal hands. The evidence is being assembled. This is not a case that's running out of steam. This is a case that's building. Let me pull all of it together, because I want you to see what this looks like case, and not just as 5 separate pieces of bad news for Brian Hooker. The GPS shows 2 deliberate circular patterns at 2 different locations, not drift, navigation. A search pattern that only exists if someone was controlling that dinghy with the engine running, the same engine Brian says was dead. The cadaver dog went through the dinghy and found nothing. The dinghy that, according to Brian's account, was the site of everything that happened that night. No trace of Lynette, not a scent signature, nothing. Multiple witnesses near the Soulmate at 9:30 that night heard a significant splash and saw flares fire from the boat. Almost 3 hours after Brian says they left the dock. 3 hours during which his story says he was nowhere near the Soulmate. 3 pieces of equipment designed to keep things underwater are missing. The weight belt, the BCD, the torpedo motor, gone from the Soulmate with no explanation. He said finding his wife was his only priority. Then he flew home while the search was still running and stopped being visible publicly. The behavior matches the profile. The evidence matches the behavior. The legal framework exists to pursue it without a body, if it comes to that. This is not proof. Brian Hooker is not charged. He is legally innocent until proven otherwise, and his lawyers have denied everything on his behalf. But investigators reclassified this case. The Coast Guard came back to the Bahamas 2 months after the disappearance. They're diving in locations Brian never described. The Soulmate is being taken apart in Florida. The dinghy is in federal custody. None of that happens if the evidence doesn't support it. None of that happens if the story holds up. The story doesn't hold up. Lynette Hooker is still missing. Her family is still waiting. Darlene is 76 years old, and she is waiting to bring her daughter home. Carly is 28, and she is watching the Coast Guard divers go into the water every morning, hoping today is the day. That's the human reality underneath all the GPS data and the legal statutes and the cadaver dog reports. A woman is gone. Her family wants to know what happened. The investigation is active. The divers are searching. The evidence is being processed. The truth about what happened on April 4th in the Bahamas is somewhere. Somewhere on the floor of the Sea of Abaco. Somewhere in the electronics on the Soulmate. Somewhere in the data from a green smartwatch that recorded circles it was never supposed to make. If you know something about that night, anything you saw, anything you heard, anything at all, contact the Royal Bahamas Police Force at 242-322-4444. Submit an anonymous tip at tips.fbi.gov or use the CGS Anonymous Tips app. The investigations are active, and they're getting closer. TikTok, subscribe. I'll bring you every update on this case as it happens, because this is not over. This is nowhere near over. Thank you for watching.